Good day and welcome to a recorded session in which Dr. Sean Turner and I, Tom McIntyre, strive to help you more fully understand how to define a behavior and action displayed by a youngster, how to determine the dimension of concern, which will then help us decide upon which recording procedure we use to gain the most useful data that will then help us to devise interventions to help kids make better behavior choices. If the material in the modules and this recording fail to help you fully succeed in your efforts, contact us by email or we can video chat.
Um, Thank you. So this is our lab session number 2. I mean, I guess it's really our first lab session since last time was on the lecture, but it's our second meeting together. And what we're going to do today is define criteria for operationalizing target behavior and examine a few strategies for determining the most important dimension of behavior, and then provide opportunities for peer feedback on target behavior, and then we'll have a Q&A for part 1 of the classroom report. I believe that this session will take about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So, I think we want to optimize our time. There's a lot of people in this session, and use it for you to get feedback from each other. So let's try it out here. Okay. Whoops, let me go back here. So, great. So behavior, it's a word that we're all familiar with and what we describe. My wife gets on me all the time when I talk about my 9-year-old and 7-year-old because how I react emotionally to their behavior affects their behavior. And she goes, how could you be an expert in all this stuff and you can't even control your own kids? And I'm like, oh man. So there's the humanistic side of behavior. And so we don't want to create a machine there. So when you're in a school, we acknowledge that you'll hear people talk about behavior in a lot of different ways, such as the student is out of control. The student is very disruptive, distracting others. I don't know what to do. The kid is going to drive me crazy. He doesn't listen. Student doesn't care about school. Student is disrespectful, rude, refuses to follow rules. All of those are often therapeutic releases, in my view, of a teacher or a parent having an needing a little emotional release of what the behavior is doing to them. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just, that's part of how we're talking about behavior. But when we look at it from an educational standpoint, what we're trying to do in this class, what do these descriptions really mean? We have to get into what are we trying to get to when we describe behavior, so we can go back, even if that's a starting point, because that's all data, whatever teachers say. We want to look at that. We recognize that they're real, but they don't operationalize the behavior. So the key word here is, how do we operationalize all these thoughts or observations about the behavior? And the key idea here is a philosophical point. Instead of looking at the child as the problem, we can operationalize the behavior, so we target the behavior, so we're not saying that the child is bad. Or we're putting those type of thoughts on those, because as my wife points out to me, how I react to my kids' behavior makes them feel a certain way about themselves. So this is always a challenge, and as a teacher, the same thing. How you respond to behavior does impact students' identity. So what does it mean to operationalize behavior? So we have 4 criteria here: measurable, observable, specific, and it describes what the student is doing. What is operationalizing behavior not? Well, it doesn't include the why, not at this level. We get into functions of behavior later on, but right now we're not trying to put a meaning on the behavior. So we're not talking about why, and we're not talking about what the student is not doing. Student is not paying attention. Okay, can't really do anything with that. What are they doing if they're not paying attention? And it does not describe how the person observing the behavior feels about the behavior. So sometimes people can write their first go around and be rather emotional, but then go back and operationalize what they saw or felt. And over time, when you start to record behavior, you'll want to stick to this type of thing. In teaching practice, it's called low inference notes. Just writing down what you see, not what you think. So an example, initial observation by a teacher, student is not paying attention in class. The operational definition of the target behavior, I have two here. I have one by Dr. Mack and one by the IRIS module. The first one, the student is off task as demonstrated by the following behavior. Looks around the room, looks at his desk, or looks at another student. Dr. Mack said, we could even simplify that further. The student is off task as represented by engaged in behavior other than the one directed by the teacher. Okay? So I want to go back to that for a second because both of those are okay. They're okay, they meet the criteria. It's not about one, there's only one way to define the target behavior. There's some style or things in there, both work. Dr. Mack feels the second one is, hey, it's a little bit more efficient than having to describe everything than writing a long paragraph. So you might think, okay, is that better? Is that better? I unmute myself or what did I do?
Yeah.
Okay, so so another example, what the teacher wants the student to do, the student will pay attention in class, and so this is called a replacement behavior. The target behavior is usually representing the behavior that's being challenging right now. And then if we do a good job operationalizing that, then we have to operationalize the replacement behavior. So in this case, well, the teacher says the kid's not paying attention. What do you want the kid to do? I want him to pay attention. Well, the operational definition of that is the student will be on task as demonstrated by sitting in his seat and making eye contact with the teacher while verbally responding to the teacher's questions. Okay? Now, this is more for the educator than the student because, you know, that's a long sentence. But we're trying to operationalize it so it's measurable and observable. When I go back into the student or the classroom to observe the replacement behavior versus the target behavior, I'm looking to see which one are they doing more. Are they on task as demonstrated by this? Are they off task demonstrated by what we said earlier? So targeting behavior, during observation, you will probably observe many different behaviors. Examples, you see tantrums, you see a kid out of control, crawling under their seat. It's the job of a team. You're not doing this as a team right now, but in your schools, we suggest that you, or recommend that you work as a team to observe the behaviors, and then you choose as a team the most significant behavior to focus in on. So for some of you, you're going to be doing that with your partners today and getting feedback, but you might observe different behaviors. We want you to choose one, the one that you think is most significant, and then look at the dimension of that behavior and the best way to record. So dimensions, once you have the primary behavior, you select the dimension that the behavior is most pertinent to. So the three that we generally refer to are frequency, the number of times the behavior occurs. For example, Charlie was observed biting other children 10 times during 1 hour period. Biting was defined as putting his mouth on other children's arms, legs, stomachs, and faces. So in that case, the observation looks at how many times Charlie bit other kids. The duration, so Charlie, when agitated, would just start biting other children for 10 to 15 minutes before being redirected. So in this case, it was the duration of the activity before he could redirect. And then in the third one, Charlie was observing biting other children, but the biting was serious enough to punctuate the skin of other children or hurt or cause pain in other children. So in that case, we're looking at the intensity. What was the biting actually doing? So you'll make a similar choice. Am I looking at the intensity of what's happening, the duration, frequency? I personally, my choice is to first look at, is this a safety issue to other children? And then start going backwards with that. To what degree is this disrupting the class or preventing the class from going forward? And then it seems to fit in there. Choosing a recording procedure. Once you identify the dimension of behavior that you want to look at, then it's really easy to identify the recording procedure, because the recording procedure, most of them are aligned to one of these dimensions. So for frequency, for example, there are frequency recordings. Duration, there's duration and interval recordings. Intensity, there's intensity rating scale. Dr. Mackey in the modules goes through all these a lot more. There's many, many different ways to observe behavior. But the important thing is to think of your procedure, not the form necessarily right now, but the procedure. Am I measuring frequency? Am I measuring duration? Am I measuring intensity? So what we're going to do now is, did any questions come up in the chat, Dr. Mack, first before we go to the group activity?
Just someone who was having a little bit of difficulty with sound, but that seemed to be on their end. Okay. But just to reiterate some of the things that you've said, you see just about every behavior in just about every kid. But what is it that makes it different in this youngster? Oh, it's how often it happens. It happens more frequently than other kids. Okay, so frequency is the dimension. Or, the other kids are doing it too. It's just how long it lasts. It seems to go on. I could put a stopwatch on it. In fact, you might. And you're saying it's the duration, how long it's lasting. Or it could be the intensity or the magnitude, that it's just so much stronger. I mean, other kids are talking, but this kid is talking loud. Other people touch, other kids touch other kids, but this kid is, boom, harder, more intense touch.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. So what I'm going to do now, let me just get the, hold on, let me put this in the link for you guys. Okay, let's put this here. So we're back here. So the link that I just put in there is for the criteria that we put up there. So you can use that to give each other feedback if you want to. But let me put this away. Okay, hold on. Okay. So what you're going to do, we're going to put you in groups of 2 to 3, and so the protocol is pretty simple. You should be able to share your screen. At least I did it as an admin, that you should be able to share your screen in groups. But just in case you are not able to share your screen, you would just read your behavior to your partner, and your choice of dimension and the recording procedure and why. Now that shouldn't take you more than a minute or 2. We're not asking you to do a long presentation. Just share your definition, share your choice of dimension, your recording procedure, and then the person that's in your group, you're going to use the ladder of feedback protocol. You might ask clarifying questions. Not deep probing questions, but just clarifying questions about the child or what they were doing or so forth. And then you might look at the criteria and do some value statements based on the criteria. I like what you wrote because it seems to really be measurable. I like it because it's clear, specific. And then the last one is, you're supposed to ask for permission, but I think we can trust each other. You just ask these are possible concerns that I might have because I didn't see this evidence in the criteria. You might want to think about this. And then the two of you can talk about that for a moment. And then the person that's presenting, you have an opportunity to respond back and maybe problem solve with the other person. How, do you think it would sound better if I wrote it like this or this? And so you have a few minutes to talk it through, and then it'll go to the other person. That whole process should take about 5, no more than 6 minutes, and then you should switch over to the other person. So you both get a chance to do that. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and break everybody into breakout groups. We have 43 people. So I'm going to do this in groups of, I'm going to go ahead and do this in groups of, you'll either have 2 or 3 in a group. So if you have 2, you'll just each do it one time and then get feedback. And if you have 3, you can each go through it, okay? Dr. Mack, you're gonna be put into a group, but when you're done, you can just leave the group and then I'll put you in another group when you come back to me, okay? You guys are gonna have 15 minutes to do this, and then I'm gonna close you out and we'll come back. Is that okay for everybody? Can you do the thumbs up? Yeah, all right, awesome. All right, let's see how it goes, okay. Hey, everybody, how did it go? Caitlin's like, I don't know. Okay. All right, so if you could put, maybe you could put a comment in our response in the chat real quick. Do you have a question, or is there something about the process that worked out really well? Just kind of, just give us some, great, there's one question here. Great, can you please clarify the difference between whole interval and partial interval recording? Dr. Mack, you want to do that one?
Right. Interval and partial interval day or the period or the hour into time segments. Might be every 3 minutes, but you're saying, gosh, every 3 minutes, I got other things to do as a teacher besides, keep track every 3 minutes. Maybe it'll be every 10 minutes. That you have some sort of signal that indicates that at the end of the time period you set up, whether it's 1 minute, 3 minutes, hour, okay, did the youngster display the behavior? For partial interval, it's did the youngster display the behavior at all at any point during that class, that 10 minutes between the dings in my ear or from my phone with the timer. With whole interval recording, we're looking at did it happen the entire time, that time segment. So sorry, everything's mirrored here. Let's go over here. That, let's say in our class period, we split it up, okay, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And at the end of every 5 minutes, you determine, did I witness that behavior? Yes or no? Either for part of the time, and those are typically for behaviors that last only a short period of, only a short time span, or let's say something like hitting, calling out an answer. Okay, those aren't going to last for 5 minutes. So at the end of your 5 minutes, you'd be doing partial interval recording. Oh, at some part, in fact, at a couple of parts during that 5 minutes, that youngster showed the behavior. So I'm making a check mark for that behavior interval. But if it's something like, um, let's see, outside the room, that the youngster leaves the room, elopes as we call it, and did it happen for the whole 5 minutes? Yes, it did. And the 5 minutes after that. And gosh, only 3 of the 5 minutes after that. So I don't get to count it because I'm doing whole interval recording. We might be trying to improve a youngster's on task behavior. And we'd like for the youngster to be on task, doing what we've asked them to do for the entire segment, each of those segments. Did I talk all around the issue, or did
No,
we get to it?
I think that pretty much sums it up. So partial is part, and whole is whole. Don't overthink it too much. So again, you are picking one. Goes to the second question: which one is best to pick? And I think it is. That's I think that's a great question, but the more appropriate question is what question are you asking? What is the question that you're asking to look at the behavior? So Dr. Mack just gave you an example. So is my question, am I looking at the student doing it any time during this interval? That's a partial. So I'd want a partial. But if I'm looking at this kind of bigger picture, are they doing this during this whole interval? Then I would want to look at that. So it's also looking at what question, going back to what question am I asking? Um, let me go back to the other questions. If you're doing duration recordings, how do you account for teacher input stimuli that stops the behavior, cuts off the duration artificially? I think
Yeah,
I
that's for
understand.
the,
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Mack. Yeah.
yeah, there we're getting into the teachers actually intervening interventions, which we would love to be in part two of the paper, that we would just see the behavior happen in its natural way. But it does not. So maybe instead of doing duration recording, we might do partial interval recording. Because the teacher shuts it off, it may not go the entire time when it would have if the teacher had not intervened. But we could say, okay, the behavior does happen for a while before the teacher gets irritated and says, stop that now. And it
Yeah.
does stop for a little bit. So maybe go to partial interval recording instead of duration.
Yeah, I think that's, in all cases, you can't, the data doesn't lie. If you pick a recording, how do we tell which is better for our focus? Well, I'll be honest, that's Emily's question, but I think other people put it in there. The way I learned is I make mistakes. I thought I was looking at frequency, and then I voted to start measuring frequency, and then I realized it's not fitting. And I'm like, oh, I picked the wrong dimension here. I'm really looking at whole interval. Um, so don't overthink it. Sometimes you got to go in there and you got a hypothesis that you think this will collect the behavior, and it doesn't go as planned. So it could be the recording type, it could be other things, but then you can adjust and you can put that in your report. Should we include every possible recording procedure we could use, or just pick the one we want to use? I believe you're saying, particularly in the Blackboard post, I wouldn't put like a 100 different recording procedures. I'd pick the one or two at the most that we're thinking about using. What are your feelings about that, Dr. Mack?
Well, we just want to give folks the experience of doing data recording. You'll be asked to do it in preparation for IEP meetings and
Yeah.
the bit part of it of an IEP that deals with behavior. What you could do is you're saying, I could measure it in different ways, but for our assignment, choose one behavior and one way of measuring it, just to give you the practice. And you could, write a little note at the bottom of your paper. I think I could have used partial or whole interval, but decided to go with partial.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And Carla has a great question. For the definition of behavior, can we include more than one specific behavior? For instance, when my student refuses to do work, he gets aggressive. By his aggressive, I mean he comes out in different ways, such as hitting teachers, peers, or throwing objects. From my view, if the target behavior is around being aggressive, and you're defining aggressive as including these things that he's doing, hitting or throwing objects, then that makes sense. If your target behavior is the actual hitting of teachers and peers or the throwing of objects, that, that would be different. I think it works in aggressive because you would be marking down every time you observe hitting or throwing as defining as aggressive behavior. What do you think, Dr. Mack, or do you feel differently about that?
I'm not sure I fully got the question, but it does seem like there's a negative reinforcement cycle going on. The teacher tries to stop the behavior. The kid tries to make the teacher back off, so escalates the behavior. The teacher decides to get tougher, and this kid says, I ain't going to do it. And it's a phenomenon we call the conflict cycle. We study it in the BD program and how we escalate situations. But you're saying, gosh, there's a couple of behaviors here. And what we want, the best behavior is misbehavior is the one we prevent, that we never see. You might, you could measure the first behavior you see, that this kid's idiosyncratic way of saying, and just do that. We could observe the teacher. The teacher responds to the behavior.
Yeah.
Or you could wait till it escalates. You could say it's a multi-step behavior and define the different parts, and you'll measure the fourth part.
I think for this, like Dr. Mack said, we're looking at you being able to just practice getting into recording behavior. So to me, if you're calling it acting out or aggression, you clearly identify when aggression comes up, and now you want to record it, so you're identifying all the actions that you're going to count as aggression. So it makes sense to me. You could go into the micro, as Dr. Mack said, but I wouldn't overthink it. I think for right now, if you want to reduce aggressive behaviors in this conflict cycle, you want to replace them with, a different way of approaching the anger or whatever they're doing to the conflict. So it kind of makes sense. Another couple of more questions I want to kind of keep us on time. We're at 7:55. If we are teaching remotely, how can we accurately measure behavior when it may not always occur on screen? I know Dr. Mack's going to respond a little bit to this. Again, part of the exercise is being able to practice recording behavior. So there are behaviors that we can record, but you might be limited by the screen in terms of the intervals or what you can record through that particular picture itself. Other people are going to take options to record behavior of somebody that they know in their own life. But it's part of the exercise to be able to record the behavior and develop a plan on what, based on your recording of the behavior, not really to do the full functional assessment at this point. So it's a little bit of balance between the theoretical and the practicing versus the actual accurately measuring a behavior to do the actual plan in a remote setting could be kind of unique because it's a little different. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, certainly different districts handle it in different ways. My kids' district, they're supposed to be on camera all the time. Uh, some districts would say no. Some kids don't want their house seen or whatever it is, and so they can just put up their avatar. But if we're busy teaching and there's 20 kids or 11 kids, however many you're teaching, and it's hard to teach and keep track of those kids, it's not like peripheral vision that we have in the classroom, the eyes in the back of the head kind of thing. It's harder online, but could your co-teacher, your paraprofessional, somebody else, other adult who has access, observe the student while the youngster's on camera? Might the parent who is concerned about the youngster's behavior keep track of the data for you? It's we're breaking new ground with everything online nowadays, and we'll make the best of it. And you put in your report, oftentimes this youngster was not able to be observed. And maybe
Yeah.
we go with partial interval recording that, you know, during a 10-minute period, I did see that student show the behavior once. Yeah,
Oh, I think so. I think what so let's just go because the next couple questions deal with this. So part of what you're putting up there for your discussion thread is to get feedback from Dr. Mack and myself. Um, what you have to put in Blackboard isn't necessarily the behavior that you would use for part one. It could be just what you're doing in practice right now and you want to get feedback on writing that and so forth. What is important is that whatever you put for part one has to be connected with what you do for part two, right? And so that's the second question that came up, that Dr. Mack, is do we, let me go back to that one. Right, so I answered that. Can it be a behavior from a student we remember if we weren't teaching this year?
that would be difficult because we cannot collect data, and the whole purpose of the assignment is to collect data. However, we have alternatives on our Blackboard site. You can observe somebody in your life. How many times does my darn husband keep changing channels? It could be, you know, uh, during a sporting event, friend curses, a number of times.
And so Carla asked, what if we've collected the data? What if we've done the data before? So they've done probably something of this nature before, so they're going to go back and look at the data and explain the data recording that they use and share that data. Can they do that?
Uh, Boy, I'm hoping that the behavior definition meets our criteria and that a dimension was measured. You can always email me, Carla, and show me a little bit of what you've got, or we can do a Zoom session. We don't want to be redundant of what you've already learned, even though I used to work for the Department of
Yeah.
Redundancy Department. But you can contact me, and we will,
Yeah, why don't,
will make sense.
so I think that's a great question to give. That's why I was saying do something early. If you don't send us something and say, what do you think? Share us your work and then give us a specific question. Email us both, give us a specific question, and we can give feedback. Or we have office hours, and I would suggest to use that. That would be great. Hing has another great question. When she does the videos for EdCPA, can she use those videos to do the behavior recording? So there's past videos, so she can look at one video and then look at another video to record the behavior afterwards after she defines it. She has the videos from her classes.
Yes, I'm thinking as long as we don't violate any legal concerns regarding watching a youngster, but I think you've already had
You can do it,
permission.
you can't share us the video, but you could go back and use the video to do your recording and just keep the name anonymous. I think that would be fine.
All right.
I'm sorry, I had a question. I apologize. I just didn't want to type it in if that's okay.
Okay.
So just to jump on Mia's question, what I was planning on doing, and I want to know if this is okay, and I think a couple other people had the same question, for Blackboard's discussion, can we use the memory of a student that we recall, and then once class begins, we can start using a new child that we're going to be working with since they don't start for another 2 weeks?
Yeah, I said that before. I answered that.
I couldn't hear. Yeah, I didn't hear.
I answered that before. Yes, you can use whatever you want to use for this session. It can be a past student. But when you do part 1 and part 2, they have to be together. You have to be able to record. So I think we're saying that as long as you're FERPA compliant, you're not sharing a video. If he has a video before that you have, that you can look at the behavior in one setting, then record it in another setting. That's an interesting way to look at it. I would say in general, think ahead and then email Dr. Mack and myself, and then you can always visit us during office hours and just say, is this good, kosher, not good? We can go from there. Dr. Mack does have alternatives on the module, so I would look at those alternatives if you're not in a classroom. And again, if there's a problem, come to the office hours and go with that. I'm going to leave that right there now because we are, I do want to honor everybody's time. I know a lot of you still have to go teach tomorrow or get your classes ready or things. So
if I could just interject for a second, Sean, that if you're struggling with your definition or the recording procedure, feel free to email me with what you've got. And I can give you some general feedback on how to improve it without actually writing it for you. Also, I plan on sticking around after our meeting for my office hours that weren't held on Labor Day.
So that's great. That's my general rule too. If you have a question, give us what you have before, not after a due date, and ask us the question, and then we might both have some things to give you with advice, and it works out really well. I would also say that we are going to use the Blackboard stuff to kind of see where everybody's at and if they're in the right place. Our next session, your task before we go to our next lab session will be to actually practice an ABC recording on a sitcom. So let's try to make it fun, and then we can practice and give each other feedback on that. So there's going to be a place there that part 1 is just due and part 2 is being introduced. So if you get really stuck, I think we're still going to be in a good place to problem solve in our next lab session. But the key to that is don't wait until the next lab session. Make sure you get the things in on Blackboard and you start on your part 1. And if you're stuck, let us know. And then we have a lot more to work with if you need to do a revision at that point. Okay. Are there any additional questions about part 1 at this point? Or are we feeling like we're okay to move forward? I got a good thumbs up. Anybody else give me a thumbs up? I love this thumbs up thing more now. Give me my reactions. Yeah, wait, here's my thing.
An offensive gesture in some cultures.
All right, thank you. Please, I think our final thing is just breathe. There's a lot, we recognize there's a lot of things still going on. People are working, we're dealing with COVID. So just keep us abreast of what's going on and what you're feeling. And we'll do another temperature check at the next check-in. And then we'll work with everybody to make this happen. All right, so Dr. Mack is great. He's really good, I'm really good. We're very, we'll work and make this workable for everybody. So just breathe and we'll all be good with it.